What can you tell me about the history of the house, the property?
When we bought this 18th century oak threshing barn, or as they say in Suffolk, thrashing barn, and the associated outbuildings from the old farm, nobody had ever lived here. The only person who was living here was a rather beautiful old barn owl. We knew that the oldest part of the property was a small calf shed, and this was of clay lump construction. Clay lump construction was much in use around here in Suffolk, where there is no natural stone. They would get clay, put straw together with some animal dung, and leave blocks of it to dry in the sun, and then use them rather like breeze blocks are used in construction today to make a wall. And this small calf shed, which I now use as a garage, had at the end an old door, and the door was unsatisfactory from our point of view because the bottom of the door was a bit ragged with use over the centuries, and there was a big hole in it, a cat hole, we thought, for a cat to go in and out to be able to get mice. So we replaced the old door, which was very wide, and it's quite a stately looking thing, with a new door, and instead of burning it or throwing it away or chopping it up for firewood, I cleaned it up with caustic soda and elbow grease and worked very hard at it. I reckon there was about 7 layers of pitch, black pitch and black paint on it. And eventually, as I worked away, suddenly these symbols appeared, and more of them, until you have the door as you see it today. Obviously, I didn't know what they were, but at first glance, they looked like the sort of thing a child might do with a spirograph or something like that, making pretty patterns. But at the time, we were converting the barn and the outbuildings. We had some Suffolk workmen here, and they looked at it and immediately said, "That's witchcraft." They knew, being steeped in the lore of the countryside and having worked on many old buildings around Suffolk, and they'd seen those sort of signs before and had no hesitation in identifying them as signs to ward off evil. And it seems that the farmers at that time were very concerned about their stock. Their whole capital, their whole livelihood was tied up in the animals they kept, and they wanted to keep them safe. And the worst thing that could happen would be for the animals to be spooked or start fighting or throwing themselves against doors trying to get out. And they put these symbols on to ward off, well, things like lightning, of course, which would have been disastrous if they'd hit a building and set it on fire, but also evil spirits. Now, the door that we have has since been recognised and investigated by an expert in this field called Timothy Easton, and he reckons the door dates from 1850s. Well, that's not very long ago. That's the same time as the Crimean War, just before the American War of Independence, 10 years before. Around that time, so as late as the mid-19th century, people were still putting onto their doors these symbols to ward off evil spirits, bad luck, whatever you want to call it. And having looked at these strange designs, I was advised by Timothy Easton, who fortunately lives quite close, that these are hexafoils, which are a normal sort of sign for this purpose, and that if you look at them in a certain way, you can see the sign of the consecrated cross, or you can see the sign of an eclipse. And there's also a sort of a fish-like design on the door, which also has a significance. So what we thought was a children's game or somebody just randomly decorating the door actually had a real and significant purpose to people in those times. And apparently this strong belief in witchcraft went on at least until the beginning of the First World War. And I don't think you have to dig very far below the surface of modern life to find that people still have a lingering belief in the old religion, the old folklore, the old beliefs around here. I mean, it's not very long ago, 350 years ago, in the next village, 2 miles away, that a man called John Noyes was burned at the stake for his religion. He was a sort of itinerant preacher, and so his tomb is up in the village. Well, 350 years ago is only an eye blink in terms of how long the Earth's been spinning. And in Framlingham, which is 4 miles away to the south, they were dunking witches in the mere there. You know, it was the classic catch-22 situation. If they went in the mere and they drowned, well, they died. And if they floated, they must be a witch, so they were burned. So the poor old woman couldn't win. So these beliefs do linger on. And with regard to this door, I was considering donating it to the Museum of Rural Life. And my wife said, well, perhaps we oughtn't to give it away. Perhaps we ought to keep it. Perhaps it does ward off evil. So it doesn't hang from any door frame at the moment, but we do keep it in the tractor shed in case it is a lucky talisman or a protection against forces of which we have no knowledge.
What was your initial reaction when you discovered the marks?
Well, I'm interested in it because I suppose you're interested in it. I'm very interested in social history. I'm interested in what went on in the past and how those beliefs of long ago still have resonance, still have echoes, still have meaning to people in the countryside. I mean, you don't have to scratch an Englishman too hard to find a peasant. And if you've got a peasant, peasants have lots of beliefs, and those beliefs were born of the hard life they lived, and they certainly looked to the weather, they looked to nature, they looked to the spirit world to inform their lives and to make them safe, because they were people who were living on the very edge of existence. They didn't live to great ages, and while they were alive, their existence was precarious. So anything that they could do to ward off sudden, untoward and disastrous consequences, well, if they could do it, they did it. And protecting their livestock was very important in that, because their whole wealth was tied up in their animals.
What did you think when the workman told you that the markings were about witchcraft?
Well, of course, I was immediately sceptical, but I also have respect for people, particularly craftsmen who work in the countryside and go around doing up old buildings and repairing things. They had absolutely no doubt about it, so therefore I was prepared to take their word for it and therefore look a little bit more closely into it, which is what I did by making inquiries of Timothy Easton, who is a leading expert in this field and happens to live not too far away. And I was interested in what he had to say. It's nice to know that the building you have has connections which go back quite a long way. I mean, we think the barn is from the 18th century. This door apparently is from the mid-19th century. It certainly puts you in the context of the countryside and what went on here. And we were the first and only people who've ever lived in this house, but it also gives you a certain sense of place and history, and gives meaning to the property. And you know that there were people who lived here before who acted upon their feelings on these matters. And it goes further, because in the courtyard of the barn, which was enclosed, it was used to keep cattle. And the cattle, over the years, by standing there, really hardened the surface. But the main purpose of the barn at harvest time was as a thrashing barn, as they would say in Suffolk, but a threshing barn. And the barn was put on the points of the compass. It faced to the south and to the north, east and west, absolutely. And the north doors and the south doors were opened, and they would thrash the corn on the floor in the barn. And the wind that would come through the barn would blow away the chaff, leaving the grains of wheat or barley or whatever it was on the floor. And all the stooks of corn would be stored in the two big chambers either side of the thrashing floor. Well, on the pillars, the horizontal pillars of the buildings next to the thrashing barn, there are scored signs invoking the Virgin Mary, Marist signs. And that was quite often done to encourage good fortune, attract the blessing of the Virgin Mary and so on their efforts to, I imagine, ensure that the harvest was worthwhile and that they would have bread to eat and beer to drink for the next coming year.
Yeah. Do you know anyone else who lived in the area with similar symbols carved into them?
Yes, well, there's the man who lives just along the way here in almost the next village called Brundish. He has something similar. Mr. Easton himself, on the ceiling of his house, have got in the plaster many of these hexafoil round symbols. They seem to be very common for witch prevention, if I can put it like that. That seems to be the default design for stopping evil spirits. Quite often, as far as I understand it, these symbols were on the overmantel or around the fireplace, because it was believed that witches or evil spirits could come down the chimney into the house, so they would put them where the points of entry would otherwise be. And of course, people sitting near to the fireplace, feeling perhaps a cold draft, might wonder, oh, is that an evil spirit or something like that? So people put these things up. We can smile at it, if you will, but belief in the occult is never very far away from the modern life these days. You don't have to go very far on the internet to find loads of people who believe in such things. I'm not necessarily a believer in that, but I respect the fact that these beliefs and traditions do continue.
Had you known Timothy Easton already before you found the marks?
I didn't know him at all, but I heard of him, and when I made the local newspaper aware of it, they told me that I think there was a lecture about to be given by him in Framlingham, which was on this very subject. So it was a real case of happenstance. It just happened by chance. And he told me, and he told the newspaper, a little bit more about these. I mean, he took it all very much for granted. It was quite a big surprise to me, a revelation, literally, removing the paints, the layers of paint and tar and pitch to find this door. But that was exactly the sort of thing that he would have expected to find in a door of that age, in a building of that age.
Yeah. I mean, was he excited by the find?
No, I think he was interested in it. It added to the body of knowledge, and I don't think that East Anglia is particularly prone to these sort of beliefs. But if you go back to the 17th century, the Witchfinder General, and he was based in Essex and Suffolk and so on. So I think there has been a long tradition of sightings of witches. And of course, as we all know, the Pilgrim Fathers, the people who left this country because they were suffering from religious persecution, many of them, many of them, were nonconformists from East Anglia, and they got on leaky boats like the Mayflower, which actually set out from Harwich, didn't set out from Plymouth. It went from Harwich round to Southampton, London, then to Southampton, and then it finally left from Plymouth to go to Plymouth Rock in the United States. And of course you know all about the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, which were well documented and written about at the time in the court records, and written about in a play by Arthur Miller called The Crucible. So it's not very long ago that people held these beliefs and held them to the point of seeing their neighbours lose their lives in the belief that they were witches or had been practicing or had familiars and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we may think we're a very sophisticated people, but scratch below the surface, not very far, and you will find that these illogical, fantastical beliefs are still alive.
Yeah. And Timothy put a picture of your door on the front cover.
Yeah, he wrote a book about it, and he used the. I suppose he used the door. I mean, it's a door, but he used the door because it's a big object. I mean, most of these things are fairly small. Here is something which is tangible, indeed movable, and it does illustrate it with quite a number of these hexafoils, which are designed there to ward off evil. That is their only purpose, with an additional sort of fish type design or dagger type design, whichever you think it is. And by studying it, he's worked out very helpfully what the designs were and what the people meant by them. And the book itself, I think, is fascinating. It's academic in many ways and perhaps hard-going to the casual reader, the general reader, but you don't have to delve too far before you find something fascinating and then maybe think to yourself, I've seen something like that. I didn't realise what it was. This is quite normal, I think. You know, it's quite apparent around the country. You'll find many examples of this, which I'm sure you are finding.
So how did you feel about having your find on the front cover of Ronald Hutton's book?
Well, I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased that he chose it, and I think it looks rather splendid, because you know there's usually a reason for everything. I mean, horseshoes over the door. What's that about? That's about good luck. Well, good luck isn't very. Believing in good luck isn't too far from believing in evil spirits. If there's such a thing as good luck, there's such a thing as bad luck. And if you go anywhere in southern Germany and Austria at Christmas time, you will always find over every door the initials of the three kings, the Magi, who came to visit Christ in his in the manger in Bethlehem, and people who dress up as the three Magi, the three kings. They go round and they visit house to house, and after they've done that, they put up a chalk mark for the three kings, their three names. I mean, these traditions live on in a slightly different way, and they are adapted to modern life, but they're all part of a distillation of what people have understood and the influences upon them and the folklore and what they've heard said when they were children and what they've learned in church or Sunday school or what they've read about. It's all there.
So where do you keep the door now? What do you do with it?
I keep it just, it's stacked in the big shed where I keep my tractor. I mean, nothing very special. We did think about possibly, if I could have found a door within the house where it could be used, I wouldn't use it, because originally it was an exterior door. Obviously it would be to keep things away from coming in. You couldn't possibly use it outside because obviously it would rot away with the weather and everything. If I could have found a suitable place within the house where we could have hung it, I would have done so. But it's a very wide door and it's not really suitable for interior use. I mean, I toyed for about 10 seconds with the thought of maybe we could use it as a coffee table or something, but I think that would be a little bit naff, and it wouldn't be suitable, and it wouldn't be perhaps kind to the door. No, we'll just keep it there. If somebody wants to use it for an exhibition, or if somebody wants to use it for a special purpose or come and study it, they're very welcome to do so. I don't want to do anything more with it than that, but as I say, I'm not going to give it away or sell it. Because, as my wife pointed out, you don't want to give away your protection. We all need as much as we can get these days, and it doesn't all come via the insurance company.
Would you keep the door here if you moved away, or would you take it with you?
No, I would leave it here, but we're the only people who've ever lived here. We converted this barn in 1988, and we've lived here ever since. And it's our intention that our family will inherit the barn if they want to. They certainly say they love it at the moment, but then they're only, just getting into being teenagers. They may maybe change. But if members of our family want to inherit it, then it will be left to them. But whatever happens, I would not countenance the door being removed from the place where it belongs, which is here.